Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Thanksgiving at my mom's house always smelled like cinnamon, cigarette smoke, and tension wrapped in aluminum foil. You'd think after 35 years of showing up, gritting my teeth, and dodging the annual passive-aggressive jabs from relatives who barely remembered my birthday, I'd get used to it. But like a fool with some leftover hope in her pocket, I still showed up every damn year. This one was no different. Except it was. And not just because of the dry-ass turkey. The house was already packed when Ben and I walked in. My cousin Sarah was showing off her new teeth veneers, bright enough to reflect the overhead lights, while Uncle Ray held court in the corner like he always did, legs wide, beer in hand, voice too loud for a room that small. He was one of those men who thought he was charming because people laughed at his jokes, not realizing most of us just didn't want to argue with him after 2 drinks. Ben squeezed my hand as we stepped through the threshold, his smile so calm it almost pissed me off. He didn't grow up in chaos like this. His family probably said grace and meant it. Mine said it like a threat. Still, he was here, suit jacket sharp, hair perfect, like he always was. He'd offered to skip this year, maybe take a trip instead, just the 2 of us, somewhere with no relatives and no undercooked stuffing, but I told him no. Not yet. Not this year. We made the rounds, hugging people we barely saw and pretending we cared how long the drive took. My mom clutched my elbow for a second too long, whispered, "You look tired, Em," like that was a compliment. And then Ray saw us. Well, he bellowed. Look who finally showed up. Thought maybe you were working a double or something. Still doing that, school job. I nodded, tight-lipped, not even bothering to correct him. I was a curriculum specialist for the district, but to Ray, if I didn't have a title that ended in executive, it didn't count. We sat at the long table, plastic fold-outs crammed beside antique chairs, everything mismatched like the family itself. Ben took the seat next to me, smiling at Aunt Jo like he actually enjoyed being asked 50 questions in 60 seconds. Plates were passed. Wine was poured. And right after my mom said her lukewarm grace, it happened. Ray leaned forward, fork already halfway to his mouth, and barked out across the table in that voice of his, the one that made your skin crawl even before he said anything mean. "You still live in that tiny-ass apartment, right?" he asked, his grin already wide with self-satisfaction. Guess hard work doesn't pay off after all, huh? There it was. The line. The moment. The reason I'd spent the last 3 days dreading this dinner like a dentist appointment you can't reschedule. He always did this, always picked some personal part of my life to slap across the table like a dead fish. I smiled. A small one, tight at the edges. I could feel every muscle in my jaw twitch. Ben didn't react. He didn't roll his eyes or sigh or even glance at Ray. Instead, he reached under the table, slow and quiet like we were in the middle of a poker game, and slipped something into my hand. A key. Cold metal against my palm. I looked down at it without turning my head. It wasn't one of our apartment keys. This one was heavier, with a leather tag looped through the ring. My fingers wrapped around it on instinct. "You want to tell them?" Ben said, his voice soft but amused, like he was in on some joke nobody else knew. Ray, who'd been too busy chewing on his own punchline to notice what just happened, suddenly locked eyes with me. My silence pulled him in. He blinked. Fork frozen midair, bite of green bean casserole sliding off like it just couldn't be bothered to wait for the rest of the show. "What's that?" Sarah asked from 2 seats over, eyes darting between me and Ben. I looked up slowly, heart thudding. Not from nerves. Not anymore. It was adrenaline. The kind you feel right before you pull the trigger on something you've been waiting for your whole life. "I'm moved," I said, voice calm like a still lake just before a storm. Ray let out a short laugh, scoffing through his teeth. "What, finally upgraded to a 1-bedroom?" Ben smiled. That goddamn calm, dangerous smile he used when someone tried to patronize him at meetings, the one that said, "You have no idea how badly you just miscalculated." We closed on a place last week, I said, setting the key on the table gently, like it was a gift or a bomb. Where? My mom asked, blinking like she'd just come out of a fog. I didn't answer. Not yet. I watched Ray's face. I watched the pink in his cheeks turn darker, like the blood under his skin knew something before he did. 2 blocks from here, I said finally. You know the old Jameson brownstone? Ray's hand dropped. The fork clattered onto his plate with a dull thunk. Sarah let out a sharp inhale. Silence hit the table so fast it felt like someone cut the power. You're kidding, Ray said, voice low, serious now. Ben just leaned back in his chair and said, she's not. And right then, right in that small, stunned pause before anyone could react, I knew we'd crossed a line that wasn't getting uncrossed. The kind of line families draw in invisible ink until someone like me comes along and lights a match. Ray stared at the key like it was something radioactive, like it might burn a hole through the table if he looked at it too long. I didn't blame him. It burned just fine in my hand for years. And now I was finally done letting it hurt me. It always amazed me how people could remember your failures better than you remembered them yourself, like my family had some kind of collective archive labeled Emma's bad choices that they added to every damn Thanksgiving. From the time I cried in 2nd grade when I lost the spelling bee, to the year I couldn't afford to fly home for Christmas and sent a gift card instead, everything lived somewhere in their smug little memories, ready to be pulled out and polished like silver when the mood struck. And somehow, in this family, it struck a lot. From the time I could talk, I knew I was not cut from the same cloth as the rest of them. I didn't scream to be the center of attention, didn't elbow my way to the biggest slice of anything. I liked books more than parties, questions more than answers, and feelings more than facts, at least the kind of cold facts Uncle Ray thought mattered. So of course, I was labeled the sensitive one, as if sensitivity were some embarrassing defect, like a lazy eye or a limp you should have corrected by now. When Sarah was being crowned homecoming queen and later marrying her college boyfriend in some beachside wedding with drone footage and professional dancers, I was pulling double shifts at a tutoring center to afford night classes. I put myself through school 1 textbook and 1 parking ticket at a time. When I finally got my master's in education, I remember showing the diploma to my mom like it was something sacred, something that might make her look at me the way she looked at Ray's daughters. But she just said, "That's great, honey. But what are you going to do with it?" Meanwhile, Ray's kids were climbing ladders in corporate towers with views, cashing bonuses the size of my yearly salary, and still had the audacity to ask if I wanted their old clothes. I told them no, of course, every time, but sometimes I took the shoes. Shoes are shoes. I met Ben on one of the most miserable days of my life. My car had been towed. I was soaked from a rainstorm. I'd just found out the school I worked at was cutting programs, and mine was on the list. He was behind me at the sandwich shop, heard me cursing under my breath because I was 47 cents short, and without a word, just paid for the whole thing. Later, over dinner, I learned he wasn't just kind. He was sharp and strangely fascinated by the way I saw the world. Where I saw disaster, he saw comedy. Where I saw weakness, he saw power I hadn't realized I had. But I didn't show him my apartment for the first 6 months. I was too ashamed. I'd let the front doorknob stay loose for years. The oven didn't heat past 300, and the paint peeled in the corners like the walls were trying to shed skin. I told him I was just staying there until I found something better, which was technically true if you count daydreaming about moving as part of the search. You know, Ray's voice snapped me back to the table. You ever think maybe you took the wrong path? I blinked, my mind still halfway between Ben's laugh and the peeling wallpaper. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He leaned in more, cutting his turkey like it owed him money. I mean, come on, he said, loud enough for the cousins to hear, you're 35. I looked at him, and in that moment, it hit me. I'd lived in that apartment for 8 years. From 26 to, wait, no. From 26 to now, that's 9 years. Damn it. I could almost feel someone correcting me in their head already, like a voice from the audience screaming, "You can't even count your own age right." Ray kept going, unaware that I was mentally retracing a decade of decisions, while also trying not to jam a fork into his smug little smirk. "You had potential," he said. "You were smart. Could have done law, or something big, like Sarah." Ben placed his hand gently on my thigh under the table, grounding me. That touch reminded me of every night he'd held me when I came home crying from a job that paid in appreciation and burnout. Of every time he'd told me, "You don't need to impress people who stopped seeing you a long time ago." I squeezed the key tighter in my hand. It pressed into my skin now, leaving a little indent I could feel even when I let go. It wasn't just a key anymore. It was something else. A reminder. A spark. A quiet kind of proof that I didn't have to win their game to walk away victorious. I didn't speak again through the rest of dinner. Let them talk. Let them measure their lives in square footage and job titles. I had something better in my hand than any of them had on their plates, and if Ray kept pushing, he was about to find out what it unlocked. The last time I cried over that apartment, it wasn't because of the rent or the broken faucet or the way the heat clanked like ghosts living in the walls. It was because I couldn't figure out how to tell Ben that I didn't want him to see where I really lived. We'd been dating for just over a year, and still, every time he offered to come over, I found some excuse. No parking, the place is a mess, long day at work, lies that got less convincing every time I said them, but he never pushed. He'd just smile and say, "Whenever you're ready, Em." That night 2 months ago, he took me to this little restaurant tucked behind a bookstore, the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu and served cocktails in glasses so thin I was afraid to hold them too tight. I thought maybe he was going to propose. Not that I was in a rush, but I could feel something heavy buzzing in the air, like a storm about to break. He waited until dessert, until I was tipsy enough to be soft and full and happy, before pulling something out of his coat pocket. It was a key. And not just any key. It had weight to it. A real key, not the flimsy kind they give you when you rent a box in a building someone else owns. This one had a tag looped through it, small leather, worn like it had been carried around for a while. I looked at him, heart thudding, unsure whether to smile or panic. "I bought something," he said, careful, slow. "Not just for us. For you." And then he told me. The brownstone on Mulberry Street, the one with the ivy creeping up the side and the crooked porch swing that always caught the morning sun, he'd bought it. Outright. No mortgage. No strings. Just mine. My first instinct was to laugh, because who the hell just buys a house and drops the key across tiramisu like it's a birthday card? But then he said something that made my whole chest hurt in that way it does when someone sees through all your crap and still stays. "I know you're proud," he said, reaching across the table. "But pride doesn't have to mean struggling alone." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, clutching that key like it might disappear if I blinked. He didn't ask me to move in with him. He didn't say it was ours. He said it was mine. And that distinction wasn't lost on me. For the first time in my life, someone gave me something I didn't have to earn through exhaustion or silence or proving my worth at a table full of critics. We spent the next few weeks renovating it together, mostly on the weekends. He handled the big stuff, plumbing, structural inspections, contractor schedules, and I handled the soul. I picked the paint, the tiles, the bookshelf wood, the kind of curtains that would feel like a hug when the sun hit just right. We didn't tell anyone. Not my mom. Not Sarah. And definitely not Ray. It wasn't about revenge back then. It was about reclaiming space. About building something in secret, far away from the noise of people who always saw me as less. Which brings us back to Thanksgiving, where Ray still looked like he was waiting for the punchline of a joke that somehow passed him by. "It's funny you mention apartments, Ray," I said finally, setting down my fork and folding my napkin like I was done pretending this meal was just food. "Because I moved out last weekend." Silence landed like a brick. My mom blinked slowly, Sarah's fork hovered just inches from her mouth. Someone dropped a spoon. No one reached to pick it up. Ray chuckled, but it was sharp, defensive, like he was trying to claw his way back into control of the conversation. "Oh yeah? Where to? Another shoebox with a window unit. I smiled, slow and deliberate, letting the moment stretch, just long enough to make him sweat. 2 blocks away from you, I said, and watched his face drain like someone pulled the plug on all his bullshit at once. His jaw twitched. His beer sat untouched for the first time in probably 20 minutes. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The rest of the table didn't dare speak. Ben reached for his water and took a casual sip, as if he wasn't the one who'd just dropped the biggest silent middle finger this family had ever seen into the center of the mashed potatoes. Sarah leaned forward, confused and curious in that nosy way she always was. Wait, where exactly? I looked at her, still smiling, but there was steel behind it now. The Jameson brownstone, I said, watching the words hit like a slap. And just like that, the room was no longer a dining room. It was a courtroom, a funeral, and a battlefield all at once. Ray looked like he'd swallowed a nail. His hands clenched under the table, and I could see the math happening behind his eyes. He knew that house. He'd wanted that house. He tried to buy that house just a few months back, lost the bid by a narrow margin, blamed it on some anonymous asshole investor who lowballed the seller. That investor had been Ben. I didn't tell him that. Not yet. I wanted him to stew in the silence a little longer. Let him wonder how deep the knife went. Let him taste the bitterness of being outplayed by the one person at this table he never saw coming. I sat back in my chair, the key still in my pocket, its shape pressed into my thigh like a brand. And I knew in that moment we hadn't even begun to peel back the rest of the layers yet. Ray laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh you let out when something's actually funny. It was thin, hollow, and sharp around the edges like a beer can cut. He looked at me, then at Ben, and back again, his mouth trying to shape a question his ego wasn't ready to ask. Wait, what? He finally managed, like the words themselves tasted wrong. I didn't look away. I leaned in a little, not to whisper, but to make sure every single person at that table could hear me loud and clear when I said it. We bought the Jameson brownstone, I said, calm and quiet, like I was just reading him his fate. The one with the wraparound porch. The one you bid on. You could almost hear the blood rushing to Ray's head, like the sound of water building up behind pipes about to burst. He didn't blink. His knuckles whitened around the edges of his plate. Sarah made this strange little gasp, half shock, half a sound she probably made when she accidentally clicked on someone else's Facebook anniversary video. For a second, nobody moved. Debbie, my mom, finally broke the silence, leaning closer like we were back in the church pew, and I'd whispered a curse. Emma, she said in a voice that tried to be soft but came out thin and unsure, why didn't you say anything? Because, I said, resting my elbows on the table like I was staking a claim. For once in my life, I wanted to do something without the entire damn table turning it into a competition. Ray dropped his fork. The clang it made against his plate echoed through the room like a gunshot in a church. His mouth hung open slightly, like a man watching his ship sink from the shore. And Ben, bless him, didn't say a word. He just winked. He winked like this was all going exactly how we'd planned it, which, truth be told, it was. See, a few months back, Ray had been bragging during a Labor Day cookout about how he was finally getting Sarah and her husband out of that starter house and into a real place. He kept talking about this brownstone he had his eye on, prime location, tons of character, all original fixtures, hardwood floors so smooth you could ice skate. I didn't say a thing. I just smiled and nodded, like a good niece. But Ben? Ben took notes. 2 weeks later, we were sitting on the back porch of my apartment building, drinking boxed wine out of mugs because all my real glasses were chipped. I remember the look on his face when he said it calm, easy, like he was suggesting we pick up takeout. I think I'm going to buy that brownstone, he said. Not just for us. For you. But more importantly, so he doesn't. I didn't answer him right away. I just stared at him, heart pounding, brain spinning, wondering if he was really suggesting what I thought he was suggesting. Won't he find out? I asked, still blinking. Won't he lose his mind? That's the point, Ben said, grinning like a kid who figured out how to beat the game without using the controller. He made the offer through a shell buyer, a law firm with a name so generic it sounded like a coffee brand. Ray never had a clue. When he lost the bid, he blamed the seller, the agent, the market, even hinted that the system was rigged. He went on a rant at brunch about how foreign money was ruining the neighborhood, and I just sat there stirring my coffee, hiding my smile behind a muffin. And now, Thanksgiving night, he sat there across the table from me, realizing everything he'd been ranting about was sitting 5 feet from his gravy boat. He pushed back from the table so fast his chair screeched against the floor. Everyone flinched. "You did this to get back at me," he snapped, standing over the table like some budget movie villain who just realized the hero had been 5 steps ahead the whole time. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him and said, "I did this because I could." His face turned from pink to full tomato red, veins pressing up beneath his neck like they wanted out. "You smug little," he started, then caught himself, eyes darting to my mother, who was now pale and frozen, still holding a fork like she might use it as a crucifix if things escalated. Ben stood up slowly, no rush, calm as ever. "Ray," he said, with a voice like chilled bourbon, smooth but with a bite, "maybe now's a good time to check on the pie." Ray stood there, hands at his sides, fists curling and uncurling like he wanted to swing, but knew it wouldn't land the way he needed it to. He didn't speak, just turned on his heel and stormed out of the dining room, through the hallway and toward the back door, letting the screen door slam behind him like punctuation. But I knew he wasn't gone. Not yet. Not Ray. He was the kind of man who had to have the last word, even if he had to dig it up with a shovel. The table sat in stunned silence. Even Sarah didn't speak, though her mouth was slightly open like she'd forgotten how to chew. Aunt Jo finally picked up her glass and muttered something about needing more wine, as if that was the thing that would fix whatever just shattered across the room. I picked up the key from where it had been resting near my plate and turned it over slowly in my hand, feeling its weight again, the cool metal pressing against the lines in my palm. It wasn't about the house anymore. It wasn't about the porch or the fixtures or the fact that I had more square footage than Sarah now. It was about the fact that for once, I wasn't sitting quietly at the kids' table of my own damn life. I had outplayed him, outmaneuvered him, and I'd done it without ever raising my voice or slamming my fist or needing to justify a single choice I made. And the best part? I was just close enough to make sure he saw me win. Ray came back into the dining room like a man who hadn't lost, just stepped away to sharpen his tongue, and this time there was no laugh, no smirk, no pretend civility hanging from the corners of his mouth. He was breathing through his nose, his boots hitting the floor like accusations, and I could feel every pair of eyes at the table twitching toward him. Waiting for the explosion they'd all been tiptoeing around since I dropped the truth like a glass of cold water onto a fire no one knew had been building under the surface for years. He stopped just behind his chair, hands gripping the back of it so tight his knuckles looked bloodless, and when he spoke, it was quiet in that dangerous way some men get when they've realized they're not in control anymore but still want to feel like they are. "You think this makes you better than us?" he said, jaw clenched, voice bitter like he'd swallowed something too sharp to go down clean. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't rise to the bait like he so clearly wanted me to. Instead, I took a deep breath, kept my chin up, and told the truth the way I'd always wanted to say it, right to his face. "No," I said slowly, letting each word sink into the room like rain into dry ground. "I think it makes me free." That was it. No shouting. No drama. Just the truth. And yet it hit him harder than any insult could have, because people like Ray only understand power when it's loud. But this wasn't about volume, this was about finality. He opened his mouth like he had something else to throw, but whatever it was got lost somewhere between his pride and the reality sitting on the table in the form of a single, heavy key that had shut every door he ever tried to hold me behind. Ben stood beside me, quiet as always, but I could feel the pride in his stillness. Not flashy, not performative, just solid like the house itself, the one he bought but never bragged about, the one he never used to prop himself up. And then, just when I thought the silence couldn't stretch any tighter, I dropped the final truth like a card on the table none of them saw coming. "It's in my name," I said, voice steady, eyes locked on Ray's. "Not ours. Not his. Mine. He gifted it to me. Every damn cent." Sarah made a sound like a laugh choked halfway through by shock, and Debbie, my mother, whose silence over the years had always said more than her words, just stared at me like I'd grown new skin. Ray took a step back like the words physically hit him. He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Not one excuse. Not one comeback. Just breath. "And here's the funny part," I said, tapping the key gently on the rim of my water glass. "I haven't even moved in yet." That confused them. I could see it in every blinking eye, every furrowed brow. Ben looked at me too, not surprised, but intrigued, like even he didn't know what I was about to say next. "It's not about the house," I said, standing now because I was done being small in rooms where I should have taken up space all along. "It's about proving I don't have to play by your rules to win." The words landed like nails in old wood. Some nodded. Some stayed still. "And Ray?" He sat down like someone finally pulled the plug on all that hot air he ran on. Ben reached for our coats as I turned to go, and we walked slowly, deliberately toward the front door. But of course, Sarah couldn't help herself. As we passed, I heard her mutter, not quite quiet enough to be private, but just loud enough to be petty, "She'll lose it." "Bet they break up in 2 years." Ben stopped, turned back, looked her dead in the eye with a smile that was almost pitying. "Then I'll just buy her another one." That shut her up. At the door, I paused, looked back one more time, not at Ray, not at Sarah, but at my mother. She wasn't saying anything, just watching me with that sad, strained expression of a woman who'd spent most of her life keeping peace in rooms that didn't deserve peace. She stepped forward, touched my hand lightly, and whispered, "Are you sure you want this war?" And I smiled, just a little, the kind of smile you give when you've already done the math, made peace with the costs, and decided you're not running anymore. "I didn't start it," I said, "but I'm sure as hell going to finish it." We walked out into the crisp evening, the kind that smells like dead leaves and wood smoke and endings. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest leaving a party. I felt like someone who had finally taken the last piece of herself back. Some people bring dessert to Thanksgiving. I brought closure. That night, back in my apartment one last time, just me, the empty walls, and the key in my hand, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the leather tag looped through the ring, there was a number etched into the underside. Not an address. A code. I walked to the little safe Ben had hidden under the stairs, the one he'd said we'd use someday when we had something worth locking away. The key clicked in, and inside was a letter, folded, with my name in his handwriting. It read, "In case they ever make you doubt who you are again." I didn't read the rest. Not yet. I didn't need to, because I already knew who I was now. And more importantly, so did they.